Dad pointed at me and said, "You've never contributed to this family." Everyone agreed. I smiled and left. 3 weeks later my sister called crying, "Why did the rent stop?" I replied, I thought I wasn't doing anything for this family. Then I cut them off. Later their perfect little world began to collapse. When Dad said it, I could barely contain my anger. "You've never contributed to this family." It wasn't shouted. He just said it like he was stating a fact. Like I'd been freeloading my whole life while he and Mom held the world together. I remember looking around the table waiting for someone, anyone, to say something. But no one did. Mom just kept eating, pretending she didn't hear it. Jenna, my younger sister, stared at her plate. She always hated conflict. The silence hit harder than the words. Because that silence meant they all agreed. I sat there replaying the last few years in my head. When Dad lost his job, I was the one who covered their rent. When Mom's car broke down, I paid for the repairs. When Jenna started college, I sent her money for books and food. Every time something fell apart in that house, I fixed it. Quietly. Consistently. Without ever being asked, because I didn't want them to feel embarrassed. And somehow that made it worse. Because now they acted like it had never happened. My chest felt like it was going to explode. But I didn't say a word. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me angry. I just stood up, walked to my old room and packed a small suitcase. I left the house while they were still sitting there. No goodbyes. No explanation. For 3 weeks I didn't call, didn't text. I went back to my apartment, blocked their numbers and focused on work. I thought maybe they'd notice when the rent payment didn't come through. Then 3 weeks later Jenna called from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me answer. She was crying before she even spoke. "Why did the rent stop?" I said, "I thought I wasn't doing anything for this family." There was silence. Then she hung up. That apartment they lived in, it was in my name. I'd been paying $1,500 a month for them. Dad's unemployment had run out and Mom's part-time job barely covered groceries. Without me they didn't stand a chance. For a while I thought maybe they'd figure it out. Get jobs. Downsize. Take responsibility for their own lives. But instead they started unraveling. Mom sent a long text one morning about family misunderstandings, and how everyone says things they don't mean when they're under pressure. I didn't reply. A few days later, Dad emailed me directly. Not to apologize. Oh no. He just asked if I could help out with rent until he gets back on his feet. The same man who told me I never contributed to the family was now asking for money like nothing had happened. I didn't even finish reading it. Deleted the message and blocked his address. Then came Jenna again. This time no tears. Just a short message that said, "They're scared." That one made me pause. Not because I felt sorry for them, but because it showed how far things had fallen. They'd built this image of being strong, proud, self-sufficient. And now, without my money holding everything together, their perfect little life was crumbling. The thing that surprised me most wasn't their struggle. It was how calm I felt watching it happen. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I just let it all fall apart. But I had no idea how much worse things were going to get. The first real crack came from the direction I least expected, Aunt Lisa. She called late one evening. I almost didn't answer because I assumed it was another guilt trip. But Lisa was different. She'd always been the one who saw things others ignored. She never sugarcoated anything, and she had no patience for family drama unless someone was being genuinely wronged. She didn't ask how I was doing. She asked what the hell was going on. "Your mom called me crying. She said you're acting cold and cruel, and that she's scared of what you're going to do next. Are you okay?" I told her everything. I didn't even hold back. 2 years of rent, bills, insurance, groceries, emergency car repairs. Paid without question. The car they used to drive Dad to appointments? The food on their table half the time? Bought with my money. I didn't say any of it to sound proud. I just laid it out like facts. Then I told her exactly what Dad said at dinner. Word for word. Lisa didn't speak for a while. I thought the call had dropped. Then she said quietly, "Barbara, you gave too much for too long. They got used to having you as a safety net. And now that the ground's cracking, they're blaming you instead of facing their own mess." That sentence rang in my ears for days. I kept thinking maybe, just maybe, after the call someone would apologize. Or at least reach out with something real, not the usual passive-aggressive nonsense. I was wrong. Instead, 5 days later I got a text from Jenna. "They used your car." I blinked at the screen, confused. I hadn't touched that second car in months. It was parked at the house because I didn't need it in the city. I gave Mom a spare key back when Dad couldn't drive and needed to get to physical therapy. But that key wasn't meant to be a free pass. According to Jenna, they had taken a weekend trip upstate to clear their heads. They didn't tell me. They didn't ask. They didn't even leave a note. Just grabbed the car, drove nearly 600 miles, left food wrappers all over the back seat, and brought it back with the gas tank nearly empty. When I saw the photos Jenna sent, I completely snapped. It wasn't just the car, it was the principle. They had crossed every line. After everything, they still felt entitled to anything I owned. That was the moment I went from cold to done. I drove over that night without warning. Took the car. Took the spare key off the wall. Got back in and left. Nobody came out. No one said a word. 2 hours later, Jenna texted again. They're freaking out. Mom says you overreacted. Overreacted. They helped themselves to my property and still had the audacity to say I was the problem. That I was unreasonable. That was the moment I stopped caring what they thought. Entirely. That night, I opened every account I'd ever paid for: rent, utilities, phone plans, insurance, streaming services, even their shared Spotify account, and I pulled the plug. Everything in my name went dark. My accounts. My cards. My patience. Next morning, Jenna messaged again. Internet's down. Dad can't apply for jobs. Mom's phone stopped working. I didn't answer. Then, as if summoned by their unraveling, Aunt Lisa messaged again. Whatever you just did, it's working. Your mom's losing it. She told me your dad might have to move in with her brother until they figure things out. Barbara, they're finally seeing what life without you looks like. For a second I felt something like relief. Like maybe this was the wake-up call they needed. I was wrong. Because instead of taking responsibility, they chose something else. They started playing the victims. After all the silence, the entitlement, the years I kept them afloat, they didn't apologize. They turned me into the villain. It started with Facebook. Of course it did. Mom posted one of her vague, manipulative paragraphs with a photo of a burning candle and a quote about family unity being tested in difficult times. Then she wrote some nonsense about how some people let pride destroy what others built with love. Not a single word about what actually happened. Just enough to make her sound noble and me look cold. The comments came in fast. Sympathy, pity, passive-aggressive digs. One of her friends commented, "Sometimes the ones you love the most hurt you the deepest." Another wrote, "She'll come back. Kids always do when they realize who really loves them." I couldn't even read more. I closed the app. Then came Dad. He posted a photo of Jenna sitting on the porch. Captioned it, "At least one of my girls still knows what loyalty means." Felt like a punch in the gut. Not just the posts but the way they were so eager to rewrite the story. To get their sympathy fix. Not once did they admit what they'd done or what they'd said to me. No mention of the money. No mention of how I kept their entire life running quietly in the background. They left all that out. Conveniently. But the part that really got to me? People believed them. A few of my aunts and uncles started messaging me directly, trying to check in. It was obvious they'd only heard my parents' version. One said I should remember what family means. Another asked if I was having a mental health crisis and told me to stop isolating myself. I didn't answer. But I didn't have to. Because Aunt Lisa did. She wasn't subtle. Under Mom's dramatic post, Lisa commented, "Funny how quickly people forget who paid their rent." Just that. Nothing else. It was brutal and perfect. The comments stopped after that. Not a single like or reply. But Mom didn't stop. Since I wouldn't answer her calls or texts, she started contacting my friends. I found out when Kelly, my friend from college, sent me a screenshot. It was a message from Mom that said, "I'm very worried about Barbara. She's isolating herself and refusing to speak to anyone. If you're close with her, please check on her. We're afraid she's having a breakdown." I stared at the screen for a long time. I wasn't surprised. I was furious. They couldn't control me anymore, so they were painting me as unstable. That same day, Jenna called again. This time she wasn't crying. He sounded tired. She said the landlord gave them a final notice. 2 months behind. No water for 3 days. Mom was too proud to ask anyone for help, and Dad had spent the last week calling old coworkers trying to borrow money. I asked her why Mom was calling my friends instead of calling me to apologize. Jenna didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew why. Later that night, I got a voice message from Dad. 2 minutes long. He didn't say sorry. He didn't even bring up the dinner. He just said things were tough, and that families should stick together, and this has gone too far. Gone too far. The man who told me I'd never contributed to the family now wanted to pretend it was all just a misunderstanding. That was the last message I ever opened from him. Dad, I called Lisa. I told her everything, what they were doing online, the water being cut off, the car, the rent, the manipulation. I didn't even try to hold it together. For the first time in weeks, I let myself say it all. Not filtered, not softened. Lisa listened. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Barbara, you didn't break this family. You just stopped holding it together." And she was right. I'd carried their weight for so long that they didn't know how to walk on their own anymore. The second I stepped away, everything collapsed. And instead of standing up and fixing their mess, they turned to blame me for the cracks in the floor. That's when I stopped second-guessing myself. That's when I decided I was done for good. And the worst part? They hadn't even hit bottom yet. By the time their third month of unpaid rent rolled around, I assumed they'd finally hit rock bottom. I was wrong. They hadn't even gotten close. It was a Friday when I got the call, from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. It was Jenna. Her voice was quiet but sharp. You need to know what they did. I sat down. He sounded different, not sad, not tired. Angry. Apparently, 2 nights earlier, Dad had invited a distant cousin to stay over for a few days. Some guy I barely remembered from family reunions years ago. Marcus. No job, no place to live, and no reason to be there. Just showed up with a backpack and a trash bag of clothes. He was sleeping in my old room. Thought whatever. Not my problem. But then Jenna said something that made my stomach drop. They told him he could use your laptop. I blinked. My what? The laptop I used for work. The one I'd accidentally left in the closet of my old room when I packed in a rush. Was the only expensive thing I hadn't taken with me. I figured it was safe. Hidden. Apparently not. Dad had pulled it out. Gave it to Marcus like it was his to hand over. And Marcus had been using it for 2 days. Logging into random sites. Downloading who knows what. On my device. With my saved info still on it. I told Jenna to take it immediately. She said she already had. Marcus had thrown a fit, but she locked it in her closet and told them it was mine and they had no right. That was the moment I lost all remaining restraint. I drove over the next morning unannounced. Walked up to the front door, rang the bell and waited. Dad opened it. His face dropped when he saw me. I didn't say a word. I held out my hand. Give me the laptop. No. He tried to act confused. Said he didn't know what I was talking about. That Jenna was stirring up drama. But I didn't budge. That's when Mom came out from the kitchen. She had the nerve to smile. I knew that smile. It meant she thought everything could go back to normal now. Like I just needed to cool off for a while and now we could pretend nothing ever happened. You hungry? We just made pancakes. I didn't respond. I turned to Jenna, who came down with the laptop already in her hands. I took it. Turned around. And as I walked out, Dad called after me. So this is it? You're just taking everything and leaving us to rot? I stopped. I turned back, looked him dead in the eye. You said I never contributed. I'm just making sure you finally get what you wanted. I left. Later that night, Jenna texted me that Marcus was gone. Apparently, after I took the laptop, he got into a screaming match with Dad about being promised a place to stay and losing his job applications. He punched a hole in the wall before storming out. A day after that, I got a call from the landlord. He'd finally started the eviction process. They had 10 days. What I didn't expect, what caught me completely off guard, was who showed up at my apartment the next week. Not my parents. Not Marcus. It was Mom's sister. Aunt Valerie. The one who hadn't spoken to us in almost 8 years after some falling out with Mom. The family black sheep. Or so I'd been told growing up. She knocked, holding a folder and a reusable grocery bag. We sat in the lobby. She didn't ask to come in. She said she heard what had happened. Everything. Through Lisa. Through Facebook. Through whispers passed around from cousin to cousin. Then she looked me in the eye and said, I cut them off a long time ago. I know exactly what they're like. I just wanted you to know you're not crazy. They always drain the one who tries to help the most. You're not the first. Then she handed me the folder. Inside was a copy of an old loan agreement. A signed document. My parents' names at the bottom. It was from 2007. It showed they borrowed $9,000 from her, and never paid it back. They had pretended she abandoned them out of nowhere. But the truth was she walked away after being used too. And I suddenly understood the full pattern. I wasn't the first. I had just lasted longer. As I stood there in the lobby with that folder in my hand, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about freedom. And I was almost there. Part 5 coming next. By the time the eviction was official, they were already pretending it wasn't happening. Mom was still posting inspirational quotes on Facebook like, closed doors are just redirection. As if losing your apartment for not paying rent was some spiritual lesson and not the natural result of leeching off someone for years. Dad stopped posting altogether, which for him was probably the closest thing to shame he was capable of feeling. I heard through Jenna that they were figuring it out. She didn't say much, just that things were tense and quiet and that she had packed a bag and was staying at a friend's dorm. She texted me a photo of her suitcase sitting on the curb. No emojis. Just a plain message, this is where I'm at. I didn't say anything back. I just transferred the money to help her get a sublet near campus for a couple of months. She never asked, never even hinted. That's how I knew she was different. Jenna never used me. She just got caught in the wreckage. That should have been the end of it. But then Aunt Lisa called. She wanted to meet for lunch. Said some of the family would be there. She didn't mention names. Just said, it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. I should have known better. But I went. It was a small restaurant off the highway. Quiet. Mostly empty except for the table where I saw 8 people sitting. Lisa, 2 cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, Uncle Greg and 3 aunts, including one I hadn't seen since Grandma's funeral. Everyone smiled when I walked in, but it wasn't the kind of smile you give someone you're happy to see. It was the kind you give someone you're trying to calm before you say something awful. I sat down. No one touched their menus. It started slow. One cousin said something about how family dynamics are tough. Another chimed in that everyone makes mistakes, even parents. Then someone brought up my dad, how he's under a lot of pressure, how this job thing has been hard on his pride. Lisa was quiet, arms crossed. She knew what was coming and she was letting them bury themselves before she stepped in. Then one of my aunts leaned forward and said it. Barbara, don't you think maybe it's time to help again? Just until they're back on their feet? I smiled. Not because I was amused, but because I expected exactly this. I pulled a folder out of my bag. The one Aunt Valerie gave me. I slid it across the table. They opened it. Read the loan agreement. $9,000 borrowed. No repayment. Mom and Dad's signatures at the bottom. Dated 2007. The room went quiet. Lisa finally spoke. This isn't the first time they drained someone and pretended they were the victims. Barbara isn't doing anything wrong. She's just refusing to be next in the line. There was a long pause. Then Uncle Greg asked the stupidest question I've ever heard. But aren't you worried what people will say? If your parents end up homeless? I just stared at him. Then I said they didn't worry when they were posting about me online. They didn't worry when they gave my laptop to a stranger. They didn't worry when they let me pay their bills for 2 years and then told me I never contributed. Why should I worry now? No one had an answer. Lunch ended shortly after that. A few people mumbled goodbyes. Most didn't. One of my cousins sent me a weird thumbs-up emoji 3 hours later and hasn't spoken to me since. That night I got a final message from Mom. It wasn't an apology. It said, "Thanks for humiliating us today. You really are colder than I thought." I stared at the screen for a while. Then I replied, "Keep pushing and I'll send that loan agreement to everyone you've lied to. I'm not scared of you anymore." She didn't write back. By the 10th day they were out of the apartment. The landlord changed the locks and listed the unit again. They were officially gone. According to Lisa, Dad ended up sleeping on a friend's couch. Mom moved in with a cousin she hadn't spoken to in 10 years. Jenna told me they weren't even speaking to each other anymore. Apparently, Dad blamed Mom for pushing me away and Mom blamed Dad for blowing up the dinner. It was over. I didn't feel proud or victorious. I felt quiet. Like a heavy door had finally closed behind me. Jenna was still the only one I kept in touch with. She sent updates sometimes. About school, her roommates, random thoughts. I never asked her to check in. She just did. I kept paying her rent. Every month. Quietly. Because she wasn't like them. But I made her a promise. If they ever tried to come back into my life with that same entitled energy, if they ever tried to guilt, lie, or manipulate their way in again, I'd shut the door for good. No warnings next time. It had been 6 months since the collapse. Not a word from Mom. Not a single message from Dad. No calls, no texts, no vague social media apologies. Just the kind of silence you get when people finally realize they've lost all leverage. At first it felt strange. I kept expecting some new guilt tactic, another relative pulling me aside to say, "They're trying." But no. They stayed quiet. Not because they respected my boundaries, but because there was nothing left to take. The support ended with me. Jenna was the only one I kept close. She was working 2 part-time jobs and balancing school like a pro. I quietly kept paying her rent each month, but she never brought it up. Never treated it like something I owed her. Just sent a quiet thank you sometimes, or a photo of the coffee she bought after finals, like she wanted to share the small wins. One afternoon she texted, "They're living separately now. Dad's renting a room above some guy's garage. Mom's staying with Aunt Brenda. Still pretending everything's fine." I didn't answer right away. I didn't feel sorry. I didn't feel vindicated. Just done. The house was gone. The money dried up. And still they refused to admit what they'd done. Then, on the morning of my birthday, Jenna texted again. "Mom wants to drop something off. Says she won't stay, just wants to leave a card. She says it's not about the past." I felt my chest tighten, but not from emotion, from memory. How many times had I let things slide? How many chances had I given her to own up to what she did? I didn't respond. At noon there was a knock on my apartment door. I didn't open it. I just stood in the hallway listening. After a minute I heard the elevator ding. She was gone. I opened the door to find a plastic bakery bag on the ground. Inside, a store-bought cake, a birthday card, and a note folded twice. The card was basic. One of those dollar store kind with glitter that rubs off on your fingers. She'd signed her name at the bottom. Not Love Mom. Just her name. The note was worse. Read. You've made your point. We all say things we don't mean. Maybe it's time to come back to your senses. This isn't who you are. Not sorry. Not thank you for everything you did. Not even I miss you. Just that same manipulative tone, like this had been a tantrum I was now expected to grow out of. I sat on the floor for a while staring at it. Not angry. Not sad. Just done. I sent one message. The last one I'd ever send her. If you contact me again without a real apology, I'll send every message, photo, receipt, and that loan agreement to every person you've ever lied to. We're not doing this again. I'm not your backup plan. This was your choice. Live with it. Then I blocked her. Phone. Every account she might try. I even changed my address a month later when I moved for work. She doesn't know where I live now. She doesn't get to know. Dad never reached out. Not once. According to Lisa, he's still in denial. Told someone at a family barbecue that I moved away and got caught up in the big city life. Still can't say out loud that he drove me away with one sentence. But here's what matters. I didn't burn the bridge. They did. I just refused to build it back for them. Jen is still in my life. We talk all the time. She calls when she needs advice or just to tell me about something funny her roommate did. I keep helping with rent. Not out of obligation, but because she never made me feel like an ATM. We made a deal. If she ever starts sounding like them, if she ever plays that guilt game or expects more than she earns, it's over. So far, she hasn't even come close. As for the rest of the family, they keep their distance now. Most of them know what happened. Lisa made sure of that. She didn't keep the truth quiet, and she wasn't afraid to say it loud when the time came. In the end, it wasn't revenge that fixed anything. It was boundaries. Hard, non-negotiable boundaries. Lines that don't get redrawn just because someone decides they miss you. My parents learned that too late. And I don't feel sorry. Sometimes kindness ruins people who don't deserve it. And sometimes walking away is the only thing that saves you. I don't hate them. I just don't need them. And I'll never let them forget that. Sometimes I wonder if they sit in their separate corners of the world and still believe I'll come back one day like nothing happened. Like the years I carried them didn't cost me anything. They probably tell themselves a version of the story where I was ungrateful, cold, selfish. That's easier than admitting they pushed away the only person who ever kept them above water. But the truth is, when you show people you'll always be there no matter how they treat you, they stop seeing you as a person. They start seeing you as a resource. And I stopped being available the day they proved they never deserved me.